Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and speak. When I was asked to speak at this event, it was a bit of a shock for me because it's one of those things you've never done. It's one of those things that you look at young minds like yourselves, and then you say, okay, how can I help you with something that I worked on? So as the great poet Rabindranath Tagore said in one of his famous songs, and I'll go in Bengali and give you a transliteration after that, is Tomar holo shuru, amar holo shara, which loosely translated means, it's your dawn and it's my dusk. So with that, I would like to start my discussion today. And I call it a discussion because at some point I'm sure you're going to ask me questions, and I like to keep it that way. My conversation is split into three parts. The first part is going to be around change and how it has impacted our fabric of life. After that, I'm going to talk about passion and how passion will help or allay our future, or will it build our future? And the last part of my conversation is going to be around how I have learned from my own experiences and how I can share that with you, and hopefully you can work with that. So let me start by quickly talking about a few changes in the last 100 years, actually 200 years. If you look at the left-hand side, you have development, where I've written economics and socio-economic activities. If you look at the last 200 years and look at the Industrial Revolution that we've all seen, if you look at the 70s, 60s, that was when the first Industrial Revolution started. And that's when was the land of the steam engine, the coal, the exploitation of coal, and the gin mills. And from there, if you calculate, it's about 110 years till the next Industrial Revolution, which would be the invention of electricity, or discovery of electricity, and the invention of the internal combustion engine. After that, there has been the 1970s, which is about 110 years again, away from there, and that was the invention of the Moore's Law. How many of you know the Moore's Law? Heard of it? All right. Yes, no? Okay. Moore's Law is basically the quantum change in technology and how technology multiplies every 18 months. That basically led to the discovery of something called the PCB, the internal transistors, the little things that generally power our machines. That's what was, the beauty of it was that expounded the next Industrial Revolution into 30 years. I was telling some people today that when I started with my computer, the first computer, it had 128 MB as a hard disk and 128 KB as the RAM. And that was something amazing at that time. And if I take you down today to the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is primarily built around robotics, the compression has been 30 years. And the next Industrial Revolution, or Industry 5.0 as they call it, is going to happen, is going to be around the virtual reality and virtualization of every bit of development. What this means is there's been a huge amount of compression. Since the 1800s to today, the industrial life cycle has compressed, and now we are in literally 30 to 20-year life cycles. What does this mean? And if I now take it down to generations, the generation gap. We've all heard about generation gaps. When I grew up, everybody said I wouldn't understand my parents, or my parents wouldn't understand me because there was a generation gap. And now if I extrapolate that to you, and I see that in my own life, when I entered the workforce, my bosses were baby boomers, the guys who came out of the Second World War. One of the biggest things about them was the fact they demanded your respect. Because they were your boss, you gave them respect. Now, if you extrapolate that to Generation Y, which is yourselves, you are not the type who are going to take orders directly. You are the ones who will need to be told, as well as explained to, why that particular decision has been taken, or the rationalization of a task needs to be done by you. Now let me extrapolate that further. The next generation, the Generation Z, which is in the cradle and coming through the educational society, some of you are younger lot, we don't know how they're going to react. Now if you look at all of that and then compress it with the last bit that I have is on technology, which has become all-pervasive. If I looked at when I started, emails were something really novel. My bosses used to work on files. But what does it mean today that you guys are now working on things like Slack, things like Instagram? What it means is information technology is now delivering a much more inclusive, and if I may hazard to say, an intrusive element into your lives. Now, it's really nice, I've given you a nice little history, but what does that really mean? What it really means is if I combine all of these evolution is slowly becoming a bit of a revolution. So if I were to just go through a quick summary on what are the forces that influence our lives, one of the biggest things you'll see is the cultural outlook. Our cultural outlooks have changed over time. There have been our biases, our cultural, for want of a better word, I would like to say influences have been amplified. Now, if you look at our work environment today, look at yourselves. When you look around in Singapore, you're not in a homogeneous environment, you're in a heterogeneous environment. You're working with different influences from the cultural side of it. Now, if I take it down further and add on to it the economic life cycles, which are a huge compression, that life cycle, which was from 110 years, now getting down to 30, 20 years, now you throw that in with a bit of society. Our societal values are changing. The way we looked at relationships, the way we look at behavior, the expectations that come out of it. And then finally, you bring it out and you amplify it with technology. These all, when they put us through the pressure, through the, as I call it, the cauldron, this leads to stress. And this is what I believe sets us apart from the rest of the the beings on Earth. But what actually this does is these factors, when they come together, they influence your mindset, they influence your abilities, and they influence your vision for the future. So what does that mean? As you'll see, I've not used too many animations because animations are too confusing and technology is something which I leave to you guys. The burden of expectation that you have on your shoulders actually is now compressed and it is even more amplified. So if you look at from where I left off as a generation of my fathers before you, you will see that the pressure has been taken and has been transferred to you. It's just, now if you look at today's example, and I'll give you a very simple example, you look at the change and climate change and looking after nature. When I was there, it was free for all. Today, we're talking about sustainability financing. And people are now talking about how do we look after Mother Earth for the next generation beyond us. If you take that with economic uncertainties, if you've seen the first major depression recorded was 1939. After that was 2008, 2007, 2008. And you take that further, you will see microeconomic tensions coming in every 10 years. It's a cycle. And even now, if any of you are interested in finance, if you look at the yield curve, it's a negative yield curve, which means that there is a pressure that may lead to a recession. But again, I digress. And if you compound that with social flux, and the social flux being that today, the populations that we were used to has changed. We have aging population. We have longevity issues. If you combine all of that, it leads to what I call stress in the system. And any form of stress is the antithesis of success. Now, a lot of you will tell me that, hey, I do some of my best work when I'm under stress. Well, my answer to that is you may do your work when you're under stress, but you don't deliver your best. You don't live up to your best. And I can say that from experience. And I'm sure a lot of you will, if you think about it, will say the same. Now, let's take it to the last bit that I have over here, which I think stress is what creates fear. Fear then ignites our primal reaction to fight or flee. And that is where we start making mistakes. And at least in my life, and a lot I've seen around me, that is where tensions start. So let me take you to the next bit. The gentleman called Hans Selye, now he is basically an endocrinologist who worked on stress. And what he basically says after all his experiments is that it's not the stress that kills us, but our reaction to it. So where does that lead us? So as they say, nature abhors a vacuum. So whenever there's a vacuum, something comes to fill it. And so if I look at it today, if there's a malady, I'm sure there's a cure. And when I talk about cure, what is it? Voila. If I look at a guy called George Hegel, he said, nothing great in the world has ever been accomplished without passion. And this is going to be the benchmark for my conversation today. What is passion? So if I go down and look at Wikipedia, it's basically, passion is a feeling of intense enthusiasm towards compelling desire for someone or something. Now, what does that really mean? It sounds really abstract. But again, as humans, we look more at our heart. And this is something that comes from our heart. I'll leave the logic part to Vulcans. So all of you follow Star Trek, you know what Vulcans do, and they abhor this topic. But again, they are not the subject of our discussion today. What I want to say about is, does this help us build something? It sounds very simple. It sounds very easy. Now I try to break it up and see, can I build an equation for passion? And something that's, it's all experiential, right? So there's no textbooks around it, there's no theories around it, it's just something I try to build. What I believe is you have to have a vision and a belief, something you strongly believe. You need a single-minded focus to top that. Then you need the determination and the discipline. And if you combine all of that, that leads you to passion. And if you look at every major event in your life or any major success that you've had, all of it has been driven by passion. Now, if you look at some of the biggest cricketers, I think Shahzad today spoke about sports. If you talk to Shah Rukh Khan, I heard you saw his speech in the morning. If you look at all of them at some points in their career have come out and have said passion is the most important thing that drives them. It's not anything else. And when I was growing up in school, I mean, there was a line which used to come up on our sports day. It was a huge placard, and they used to stick it up, and that said, "Find the passion, the means will follow." So when I looked at that, and I said, seriously? I seriously don't understand that. What does it mean? Find the passion, and what's the means with it? It took me 30 years to figure that out. And the best time to find your passion is when you are in a bit of stress, when you really have a lot of problems in your life. And what passion does to you, it helps you build confidence, and it just helps you take it on. I mean, if you're passionate about something, you really put your mind to it. When you put your mind to it, you start delivering on it. And when you start delivering, it starts generating a confidence. And it's a really self-fulfilling criteria. It just comes on, and it's just like an avalanche, keeps rolling. Right? So with that, what I want to talk about is what are the characteristics of passion. And I'll use an example over here. My example is that of an Olympic archer. Now, if you imagine yourselves to be an archer, and you've got a bow, you've got an arrow, and you've got a target, what are the first things you do? The first thing you'll do, to reach that place of being an Olympic archer, you actually were committed to being there. So you must be one of the best of the best. So it's never an infatuation or a fling to do something. If you think, hey, at some point people say, I'm going to start up a company. 2 weeks later, when they hit the first barricade, they say, oops, this ain't for me. How many of you seen that? How many of you heard that? Make sense? And that's exactly what it is, right? First roadblock, you say, bye-bye. That's not me. I'm going away somewhere else. So back to our Olympic archer. Our archer, if he were to take aim, and he sees, oops, I can't see the target, or it's too far away, and he walks away. That's not what it is. He gets swayed. Or he sees, okay, I'm going to fire that, but hey, there's some wind. What does that mean? Oh, the target's not static. My thoughts are not static. So, passion is never static. It helps us evolve. Passion is not something that you say, okay, today morning I'm passionate, and every morning you wake up and say, I'm passionate. It's not that. Your passion has to be calibrated with how you grew up, where you grew up, and your mindset. All of these change every few months, even as some people say in days. Now, as that happens, you need to calibrate yourself. And as you recalibrate, you start becoming more passionate. And the passion grows with you. It doesn't become static. It's something like if I could say, it's like speed. You start, and you throw a ball in space, and it just goes gaining momentum. And that's what it is. It doesn't have friction. It doesn't stop. The last bit is on despair. Now, you're an Olympic archer. You missed the first shot. Don't go back to equation 1 and say, oh, shit, I missed it, so I have to move on. So effectively, what happens is that you look at it and say, therefore, if I'm an archer, I have an undying commitment. Hence, I'm in the Olympics. I've beaten the best in my country to reach and compete with the very best in the world. It is a permanent thing. My passion is permanent. It grows with me. It doesn't stop. It doesn't finish. If passion finishes, trust me, you're dead. I've seen people who are out there in their professional careers, and they call it burnout, and that's nothing but losing their passion. And the last bit is that it is fluid and it's adaptive. You have to adapt with it. It helps you adapt. And the biggest thing passion gives you is hope. In the long term, what I've seen is passion has some other very ramifications, right? One of the biggest things passion has been for me, it's been a motivator. But one of the other things that I've seen with passion, and I don't know how many of you have seen it, but whenever you get into a very tricky situation, when you see a very, very rocky road in front, what is the way you react? And this is where I'll borrow from the Navy SEALs. How many of you have heard of the Navy SEALs? The Navy SEALs, as you know, are one of the most hardened, intelligent, and ruthless people on earth. And they've been trained that way. One of the tricks they've been always taught, and this happens when when they get into uncertain situations and how they manage uncertain situations. Now, if you think we have uncertain situations, think about them. They're behind enemy lines. They don't know when they're going to be extracted, how long the mission's going to take, and what have you there. One of the big things they talk about is what I now call the theory of micro-visualization. So when I've seen in my life, what I have done is I've taken, whenever I'm in a stressful situation, I'm losing hope, losing focus, I actually take out my full task, I break it down into small chunks, but along with it, what I do, the chunks are not could be based on task sizes, or could be based on time limits. Like this morning when I woke up and I had to come and prepare for the speech, I was like, all right, this is going to be tricky, but let's see, how do I do it? So the first thing I did was I looked at my notes, I split them up in buckets, so 3 big chunks. With the 3 chunks, I said, okay, these are 5 minutes, 5 messages that I need to deliver everywhere. And what that does is every time I achieve that, it gives me a sense of purpose. It says confidence, yes, I've done it, and it gives me the confidence to roll over. What it also does is keeps me on the task. It doesn't let my mind wander. And the third thing it does, it also reinforces inside me the belief that I can do it. So with that, I would like to say, and what really matters is the passion. And if you can find the passion, the means will follow. And to sum it up, you've all heard of Steve Jobs, and I'd like to just say one line: if you're not passionate enough from the start, you'll never stick it out. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.